us this morning, reminding me that the Chiefs come on at noon. And I said, yes, I know, 8:30 was full and everyone was in their Chiefs jerseys, so they always remind me. And I've got my little clock, so I'll have you hopefully home for kickoff. We enter into this almost our last week, or next to our last week of our Reclaiming Jesus worship series, where we explore various images of Jesus and how we might connect anew with a new and different one from the one we normally prefer. And as I was reading this scripture this week, this story, healing story, I couldn't help but think back to almost 15 years ago. I know it was 15 years ago because Jake was small, our son. He was little. He was just a few weeks old, and I had just returned to work from maternity leave. And one of our church ladies was sitting in my office wanting to visit and sharing with me that she was coming up on the 10th anniversary of the death of their daughter. Their daughter had died as a toddler from brain cancer. She was wanting to have this anniversary memorial service because, as she explained, she said, I could barely remember the funeral that we had 10 years ago. She said, between my grief and the medication that the doctor had prescribed for her grief, she just didn't remember. And so she had this small box that she brought and plopped on my desk. And inside were journal books from the final weeks of her young daughter's time in the hospital. And she plopped them down and she said, these are my journals, and I want you to read them so that maybe you can begin to understand, so that you can plan this service. Now, the first thing you should know is I was still a nursing mom, and so my hormones were everywhere, and I probably had no business reading those journals because I probably cried for a month. But one of the important pieces around what I found in those journals was that the tradition she had grown up in, the church tradition that she had grown up in, is one that held paramount this particular image of Jesus as healer. So as her daughter was sick and dying in the hospital, her family and friends encouraged her just to pray harder. I heard you back there. Just pray harder, and the great physician would heal her baby. So what she had actually been healing from over the last 10 years, in many ways, was a sense of overwhelming guilt that she hadn't been able to save her little girl. Why am I sharing that story with you? Well, first, it reminds us that this notion of a holistic image of Jesus, and sometimes we get caught up in our one primary image, the image of Jesus we most resonate with, and we hang on to it so tightly to the detriment of all the others, and sometimes to the detriment of ourselves. And I know, or I think I know, that for many of you, this image of healer for Jesus is one that is a bit of a conundrum. We don't quite know what to do with this image of Jesus that we find here in the 10th chapter of Mark. This man is sitting alongside the road as Jesus and his entourage of groupies parade out of Jericho. And he begins shouting at Jesus, "Son of David, have mercy. have mercy. And he shouts louder and louder. And of course, there are good church people, I'm sure, who are coming along with Jesus and they're hushing him. And the scripture says, the more they hushed him, the louder he grew. They tried to quiet him and silence him and make him invisible, until Jesus at last stops the caravan to assess the situation. The one interesting thing about this story, well, there are many interesting things about this story, but the first one that is interesting to me is that the gospel writer gives this man a name. Oftentimes, we get a random, nameless John Doe or a Jane Doe. And if you worship with us regularly, you know that I always try to give these people a name. Sue or Jack or Bill or Mary. So that we can identify with them and see them as fully human. Giving someone a name, knowing their name, gives you more of a relationship with them. And here we have his name, Bartimaeus. I don't know why some folks get names in the stories and some folks don't, but Jesus asks this man, this Bartimaeus, a very important question. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asks him. An interesting question, but not the first time Jesus has asked someone this question, not even the first time Jesus has asked someone this question in this chapter. And this is a good reminder to us as to why it's important to understand the context of where we find our scripture stories each week. They don't just fall out of the sky as an individual short story. They are a part of a greater narrative. And if we go back just a few verses, we see Jesus asking this same question, what do you want me to do for you? To two of his disciples, to James and John. James and John answer the question wanting power and prestige and privilege. They say, allow one of us to sit on your right hand and one of us to sit on your left hand when you enter into your glory. And 15 verses later here in this story, Jesus asks this same question of Bartimaeus. Can we just call him Bart? Can we just say Bart? Is that okay? Thank you. We're just going to call him Bart. That feels easier. He asks Bart, and Bart responds, Teacher, I want to see. I wonder if the writer might have done better to write, I need to see. I think maybe perhaps there's a difference between wants and needs here, but I didn't get to write it, so that's not mine to do. I want to see. And as I said, we don't talk much about Jesus as healer. So what do we do with this compassionate Jesus? Well, the first thing I want us to do is to look in the dorky way that I sometimes like to do with our dictionaries. The first thing I want us to do is think about the word miracle. We often drop this healing story into the big pot of miracle stories, and we think, oh, it's Jesus, and so we can't really do miracles, and we don't come from that tradition of whacking somebody on the forehead and making them well. That's not our way. We send people over across the street to St. Luke's or out to KU. But perhaps if we re-understood the word miracle or looked at it in a little bit of a different way, that might help. Because otherwise, we end up with making this story about something that's unreachable and unattainable, and it just perpetuates the pain my friend felt. And so maybe if we look at it in a different way, we too might find that the miracles that we prayed for that never came, maybe you've never prayed for one of those miracles that never came. My Ryan still has Crohn's every day. But miracle. It's from the Latin word mirus, M-I-R-U-S, mirus, which means to wonder. To wonder. And then when you look it up in the dictionary, it says a surprising and welcome event not explainable. So how might we think of a miracle in our modern context? Especially with this healing miracle, because there are no blind Bartimaeuses sitting on the street corners here in Kansas City, are there? Perhaps. Perhaps I passed one this morning who was on my way in at about 6:45, sitting in the median at the end of Cleaver Boulevard here at the corner of Cleaver and 71. Perhaps Bartimaeus is the man who regularly sits at the entrance to the Broadway Bridge as I cross it to go back north of the river at the end of my day. Bartimaeus. Remember what I said about giving someone a name? Gives us a relationship with them. It changes somehow how we see them. We still have Bartimaeuses crying out for mercy. They just cry with cardboard signs, perhaps. And when we don't take this image of Jesus seriously, when we chalk it up to an unknowable, undoable miracle, we end up like the rest of the crowd following Jesus, trying to hush and ignore Bart alongside of the road. So perhaps the first miracle of this story, the first wondrous and welcome and surprising event of this story is that Jesus acknowledges Bart at all. What do you do when you see Bart sitting in the median with his cardboard sign? Do you suddenly have to fiddle with the radio so that you don't have to make eye contact? Or because you're sitting at a stoplight and you got your foot on the brake, it's a safe time to send that text that says, "I'm on the way home"? It's hard to know what to do. And sometimes I think many of us find ourselves in the situation that if we can't fix or help all the Barts that we find along the road to Jericho, that, well, I guess we'll just skip them all. But Jesus shows us a different way, and he tells us his name is Bart. A miracle, to be sure, that he acknowledged him at all. I want to look at another word because I know we're getting close to kickoff. Another word I want to talk about is compassion. Oftentimes we use great physician with this image. Great physician, but I've chosen to think about it differently and use the word compassionate healer. What does Bart call out for? What does Bart call out for? This is where the choir, I know you've only been back 2 weeks now and you've forgotten. This is your job to help me. Mercy. Mercy. He cries out for mercy. And the word that comes to my mind when we talk about mercy is compassion. Compassionate healer. Compassion, when we look at this word, the first three letters are C-O-M. The first same three letters of community. Who knows Latin? No one. That's not true. It comes from the Latin compati. Com is together. Pati, to suffer. Compassion is to suffer together, like the choir does, having them to my back. To suffer together. When we reclaim this image of Jesus for ourselves in a new way, we know that Jesus asks us with compassion, what can I do for you? Now hold on to this suffer piece for a minute. Set this over here. When we think about Jesus asking with compassion, what can we do for you? When we take this image seriously as Bart, and we answer honestly, we can claim what we need, not just what we want. Indeed. Because unlike Bart, we tend to keep to ourselves the stuff we need around mercy and healing. Example. Happens all the time. Jesus says, Jeannie, what do you want me to do for you? Says Jesus. And Jeannie says, oh, Jesus, I'm fine. I got it under control today. I didn't have to evacuate my house and my 3 kids and my little corgi dog to go to higher ground. A lot of people got a lot worse than me, Jesus. I'm good, but thanks for asking. When we fully embrace this image of Jesus as compassionate healer, and we think about how we might embody that, that's been our goal each week, is to think about how we can embody this image of Jesus for ourselves as we strive to live Jesus-like lives. That when Donna asked Jeannie on a Sunday morning, how are you? That perhaps that is the Spirit at work asking, what can I do for you? Oh, I'm fine. And we begin to build a wall to keep that healing spirit of Jesus out. And all the little things, all the little healings that we don't allow Jesus to help us with, harden our hearts, harden our spirits. And if we can't manage the little ones, how in the world will we ever manage a big one? How will we ever open our heart to the healing presence when there's a biggie? Because they are always coming, a biggie. But we do it together. We do it together. So if we can be together in little things, like, my boss was a jerk this week, and I had a horrible day. And on Thursday, I went home and wanted to quit. You're nodding your head. When we can be honest with one another around that, then maybe we can begin to be honest with one another when there's really big stuff happening. Not that quitting our jobs on a Thursday isn't a really big thing, but we deny ourselves the opportunity for a little mercy. We deny the Spirit the opportunity to do a little healing. And some of you know that one of my favorite lines from Father Richard Rohr is that if you don't transform your pain, you will transmit it. If we are not healing the little stuff all the time, well, you kicked the dog on Thursday when you came home. Or you yelled at your spouse. or screamed at your kid or whatever it is you do. So we have to be more intentional. We have to pay attention. We have to choose differently. Bart chose. He made the choice to tell Jesus, this is what I need. How do we choose love? How do we choose mercy? As if a movement of the Spirit, a little email that I get every morning said this, just this morning at 5 o'clock. People gain so much hope when they know they are not experiencing something alone. One of the miracles for Bart was that he was not alone. So what did he do at the end of this story? He doesn't go back to being alone. He goes with the band of groupies out of Jericho. We choose sometimes. Deepak Chopra, who is a physician and a spiritual teacher from an Eastern tradition, says this: every decision we make is a choice between a grievance and a miracle. I let go of grievances and I choose miracles. In every choice. Remember what it said? To choose a miracle? To wonder? To choose a surprising and welcome event? How do we choose differently? How do we choose love? How do we choose hope? How do we choose to step outside of ourselves to be agents of the compassionate healer? This week I wonder how we might choose miracles over grievances. The world is really good at choosing grievances and posting them on Facebook and Twitter. Seems like there's plenty of that, and a few more miracles could be abound, and may we be about that. May it be so. May it be so for us. Amen.